Hello everyone, and welcome to this first Tech AMA session for Google Scholars in Android Basics. We have received a lot of questions, so don't worry if your question does not appear in the video. We will have more opportunities. That said, let's go into the first question. Why do we use XML and Java in the course? As you have probably noticed already, we use XML to define the layout of our application, which essentially means which elements we have on the screen and which is the position of them. Kind of the design in a sense. Then we write our code and our logic in Java, because our apps will run in the Java virtual machine. For some time, we have been able to use also Kotlin, which from the last Google I/O became a fully supported language. Can JSON be used? I'm very curious because there are a lot of languages out there. Well, JSON is not technically a programming language. It's a way to define and structure our data. So we will use JSON as the course continues, receiving JSON from the server and showing it on the screen. Are we supposed to learn Kotlin or Java? What should we do? Well, these days, many people have the same question. The thing is, you can write Android applications using both Java and Kotlin, and you can even have them at the same time in your project. But as you are starting learning, it makes more sense that you learn Java. It will make you more employable. There are much more projects out there with Java, and you will have the opportunity to learn Kotlin in the future. So once you know and understand how Android works, and you have some knowledge of Java, then it will be time to start learning Kotlin. I will find particularly weird to meet someone who knows Kotlin but cannot really work with a project that is written in Java. Should we upload our projects to GitHub? Well, that's not mandatory at all, but it's recommended that you use GitHub and upload your projects there. Why? Well, it's a way to show your portfolio. You can link your projects in your CV and show the code you write. How can I build an application with a database? Well, this is not part of this first course, but you will have the opportunity to work with databases as you continue in the nano degree. So for now, don't worry about that. Time will come. In Project 3, what is better for implementing a single screen quiz using a ScrollView? To enter them all in an XML, referring to the strings XML file, or to create empty text views, checkboxes, etc. in the XML and fill them programmatically? Well, this is a bit tricky. Let's put things in context. At this stage in your learning, making things programmatically maybe is too much. So you may need to learn a few more things. Because of that, we don't expect you to do that programmatically. Now consider that you have, let's say, 4 questions. That's quite simple. You can do in an XML and take the first option here. There's nothing wrong with that. Now imagine that instead of that, you have 100 questions. Try to imagine how big your XML will be. That seems a bit crazy, and in a scenario like that, you may want to do it programmatically. But we have another scenario that we should care about, and is, what if we don't know how many questions we have? So maybe we have 4, maybe 100, or maybe 2,000. How can you build an XML layout like that? It's technically impossible. So for that, what you will have to do is to use a list view or recycle view and an adapter and all those kind of things that you will learn later on. So don't worry, time will come again for this. Images often crash my apps due to lack of memory. What's the best way to avoid this issue? Well, I guess that you are using images that are too large, too big. And displaying an image on the device requires some memory. If the image is too big, then you require a lot of memory, and what you have is an out-of-memory error. Let's see how we can solve this. So if you Google for Android large bitmap, then you can get into this documentation. And here is explained how to deal with that. Probably the best options or easiest is use libraries such as Glide or Picasso. And if you want to do programmatically, here is explained how to do that. So you will have to resize that. Okay. Sorry. Another option is how to support multiple screens. So here we have two important pieces of documentation. So in this one, you can see you have a screen size, a screen density, orientation, resolution, all these kind of things. And images can get into different buckets like medium DPI, high DPI, extra high DPI, and so on, depending on the screen of the device. So usually you will have to create different versions of the same image so they get displayed properly in different screens. For example, here you can see in this on the top, you can see that the image here is bigger than this one, and this one is even smaller. Ideally, all images should display the same size in terms of physical size, like square inches or square millimeters, whatever you prefer to say, whatever the device you are working at. And that's why we use this extra large, large, we use this HDPI, extra DPI. So as you can see in the bottom, all the images have the same size independently on which device they are running at. So I will advise to have a look at this documentation because it's quite important. And also you have here qualifiers, and you can see LDPI, MDPI, all these kind of things, how things should behave in landscape or portrait, okay? And also this other documentation. So use like wrap content, manage parent, and this way you can try to get a, say, homogeneous behavior in all the different devices. And also, as it says here, the qualifiers that are probably better displayed in this other screen. Okay? So, is there other recommended layouts we should study besides linear layout and relative layout? Well, I would say the most important extra that you will need to care about is the constraint layout. Constraint layout is a more modern layout in which the views are in a flattened structure. And you have a very nice tool in Android Studio to play with and try to get your complex UIs from this. Okay. Now, what's the difference between gravity and layout gravity? So for that, I have here something that I searched to make it easier to explain. So if you forget about the about the bottom and just focus on the top, this explains what gravity is. And you can see that we have those boxes, okay, and the text is in different places inside the box. In other words, gravity defines what's the position of the element in terms of inside the element. So what's the position of the text inside the box, say in an easy way. If we go to the bottom part where it's explained about the layer gravity, this is more like how the box is displayed according to the outside world of it. So you can see that in all of them, the text is on the upper top corner, in all of them, but the position of the box is different. So here's on the left, right, center. Obviously in this case, center and center horizontal does not make any difference. But that will be the difference between gravity and layout gravity. Okay, so how can I make a progress bar that takes user input like the brightness bar? I can do a progress bar and give it a fixed number, but can figure out how to make the number user input. Okay, so the first thing is, if we go to the emulator and we are speaking about this kind of progress bar, this is actually not a progress bar, it's a SeekBar. And let's go to search for SeekBar. Okay, so let's try to find one of these that is good. Okay, so as the student said, the problem was that he was able to put a progress bar, but it should be a SeekBar, not a progress bar. Okay, and the problem was that it was unable to manage how to deal with the user input. And if I don't understand wrong, what I think is that the problem is that you're missing is a listener. Okay, so the problem here is like you have this volume control, which is a SeekBar, and then you need to give it a set an on SeekBar change listener. And then, depending on what you do with the SeekBar, these methods will be executed. So depending on what you want to do, once the user has moved the SeekBar one way to another, you will have to put your logic on there. Okay. So the next one is there a way to skip this casting? You have probably seen and written something very similar to this. I have highlighted that part in yellow. That's the casting, and that's the idea of the question is there a way to write this same line of code without the need of writing that text view there? Okay, let's go to Android Studio. Okay, so Android Studio, and say this is an edit test. Oh, if you want, we can do it with this text view. So as you can see, I am not writing this. Okay, and I can write this line of code without that casting. So why is that? How can I manage to do this? You've been writing this all the time. So the thing is that this casting has been necessary for a long time, since the beginning of Android. But in the last Google I/O, with API 26 which is Android Oreo 8.0, Google announced that that casting was not needed anymore. So if you are targeting API 26 and you have the compatibility libraries, you will be able to do exactly what I've done here, which is you don't need that casting anymore. Okay? So what about the next question? Why should we keep colors, strings, dimensions as resources rather than hard coding? What are the downsides? Okay. To start with, hard coding is really bad practice, and you should try to avoid that as much as possible. Okay. Let me give you an example on why this is. So I have this sample app that I have built for specifically for this AMA session, and as you can see here, I have a dimension that I have defined, and this dimension is set to be 16 dp. Okay, so I'm using this margin in all of my views here. Okay, now if I want to change the margin, let's say that that margin was written there like 16 dp in all of them. What happens if I want to change it? If I want to change it, I will have to come here and manually write 32 dps. But not only that, I will have to change it in this one, and this one, and this one as well. And it's only 4 of them, but my app can be quite big. So what I do instead of that is defining another dimension. Now, if I want to change it to 32 dps, I can just come here. I change it in one single place, and I'm done. It's changed everywhere. As you can see, the position of the calculate button here is quite different to this way, because the margins are half of the size. So I'm going to keep that margin on the 32. Okay, it was 16 initially, but let's keep it in 32 for now. That said, this same thing applies, for example, to colors. So here on the top is blue, but what if we change our mind and we want to turn it to yellow or red? Well, we have many screens, and it makes more sense to change it in a centralized place that will be our colors.xml. Okay, and here our colors are defined. So if I change here this for, let's say, for example, it's not the best color, but let's say something like again, same thing. Okay, it's more like pink. You can see that it has just changed. Okay, so that's gonna undo this completely. Okay, so in short, hard coding is not a good thing, and keeping the things in resources allows us to modify things all across our app very easily. Okay. What about a strings XML? A strings XML is an interesting thing. Okay, so we have our values, strings XML. Okay, a strings XML helps us to deal with translations as well. So in our main activity, I have here this calculate, this text for this button, which is not in a strings XML, it's hard-coded, okay? Now let's gonna extract it in the strings. So let's say calculate button. Okay. In theory, it doesn't make any sense yet, but let's make it obvious. Okay. So let's go to resources and add a new resource file. In this resource file is going to be values. Okay. And is going to be values. Let's say strings and XML. And we're going to do for, let's say, as I'm a Spanish, that's going to do for Spanish. Okay. There we go. So we have our strings XML file in a folder which is called values es. Okay. Now let's gonna take this item, which is the calculate button, and let's gonna translate it to Spanish. Okay. Now let's run our app. Okay, it's installing. Okay, and obviously we don't see any difference. But what happens now if our app or our mobile phone device is in Spanish? So let's say that we want it to be in Spanish. Okay. Okay. Here you see our text here is in Spanish now. Okay. All our menus are in Spanish, which probably doesn't make any sense for you. Fair enough. But if I go to our app, now the button appears in Spanish. So strings XML is something that we really need to use. First, because it allows us to be able to change things in one centralized place, and secondly, because that will allow us to work with different languages. So let me come back to English. And again, the UI is in English now. So how does this work? The way it works is that by default, the OS will gonna take this strings XML. But if the device is running in Spanish and we have strings XML defined for Spanish, it will take the strings from here rather than taking from this default. Okay. So I think we can go now for the next question. How can I make my app fit with all kind of devices and screen sizes? Okay, that's the way that you do is you need to use DPs to define the dimensions of things, which are density independent pixels. Okay. And with that, things will look similarly depending on the device. Okay? But what happens if the device is much bigger, like a tablet, for example? Or what happens if the device is in portrait mode, okay, or landscape mode? Okay? So coming back to our emulator, and let me explain a bit on what this app does. It's a very simple app that takes two numbers, okay, And when you click on the calculate button, it just creates the sum of them. So 2 plus 3 is 5. That's simple. Okay. Remember that we changed the margins from 16 dps to be 32. And what that creates is that if we go to landscape mode, well, there's no space. We could add here a scroll view, but still that will be a bit painful. I mean, from the UX perspective, it will not be nice for the user to have to scroll in order to be able to click the button. So how can we deal with that? Okay. The way we do this is we create a new resource file, which is a layout, okay, and we're gonna call it activity main, and we're gonna say that this is for orientation landscape, okay. So what has happened? Now we have not only a layout folder, but we have also a layout land, which is landscape, okay? And before we saw that depending on the language in which the device was running, we could have the system using one string's XML or the other. So now what's going to happen is that depending on the device being on portrait, on landscape, one layout or the other will be used. So let's go for this layout and change it completely. Okay. So I'm copying it and I'm gonna change the way it is. So for example, let me put this 2 in a linear layout, for example. I can do maybe okay. So does it look any different now? Let's gonna have a look. Okay, so this is the orientation here. What's going on? Oh, yeah, I guess this is the problem here. Oh. Okay, anyway, that's gonna do this differently. I think that makes sense now. Okay. So as you can see, the layout now is pretty different. That's going to run our app and come to the emulator. So in portrait mode, it is exactly as it was, no difference. Now in landscape mode, we see that the layout is different. It still is not good enough, but you can see the difference. We can probably do something similar here as well, just to make it more obvious. Okay. What's going on? There we go. Okay. Okay, so you can see now, it's not nice, it's not beautiful, okay, but I can do 2 plus 6, calculate 8. And if I rotate the side, the layout is different, which was the idea, okay? So let's go for the next question. So how can I make the app responsive so as to change, for example, the text size on the basis of the resolution of the display? Okay, so when we are building our app, we need to use DPs, and this is density independent pixels, and this is explained in the documentation that I shared before. When it comes to text is a bit different. Okay, the reason for that is that, in case that you didn't know, you can go to settings and probably here, yeah, here you can change the display size, okay? And because of that, you cannot use DPs on the text. On the text, you need to use SP, which is scale independent pixels. And you can see here, I have used 22 SP for the text in that text view. So next question. How can I save the values in my activity when orientation changes? Interesting thing. So in case you have not noticed, when I rotate, the 8 still is there. Then that is because I have some changes that I need to undo. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Okay, so let's come back to this. Run the app again. Okay. So 2 plus 3, 5, and I rotate the app, and the 5 gets lost. Yeah, this is consequence of the changes. So that's going to revert everything here. Strings. I mess up a bit. That's okay. Come here. Okay. Should be good. Okay, so as I was saying, if I say 2 plus 3 is 5, and when I rotate, the 5 gets lost. Okay, 2 and 3 get there because it has been something that the user has done, but that the result on the text view is something that happens programmatically, so the app doesn't know that it needs to keep that. Okay. How do we do that? It was working before, and the reason it was because I had a fix here. So let's gonna add this fix. What we need to do is to come to the main activity and override on save instance state. Okay. Now in here, what we're gonna do is in our bundle, we're gonna put an extra that we're gonna call it with a string like my result, for example, and that's gonna put the value, which is TextView.getText to string. Okay. What happens is the first time that we create the activity, this bundle here is null. But the second time after rotation and following times, it won't be null, and it will have the value that we have put here. So let's going to extract this to a constant. I'm just going to call it for example. Okay, so what we can do here is if save instance state is not null, then if save instance state contains the key, which is extra result, then what we need to do is to put that value in the corresponding view, which is string total will be save instance state that get extra result, and then text view text total. Okay, so let's gonna run this and see if it works. Okay, so say 2 and 8, it's 10. And what if we rotate? Okay, always rotating to the wrong side. And you see that it has been kept here. So in other words, what we are doing is we are saving the value in the bundle, okay, with a given key. The first time that the activity is created, this bundle is null. So this code inside here won't be executed. After that, when we rotate and we have saved the value here, the instant state bundle will not be null. Then we can go into this, we'll see that it contains the extra, and we put it in place. Okay, let's go for the next question. When will nesting layouts start to slow down the performance of an app? Well, I will say for now, it's not something that you need to worry much about. You will need to do a quite complex UI to start seeing this kind of behavior. There's some scenarios, like for example, when you have a linear layout and the dimensions of this linear layout of the elements is calculated on the fly depending on weights, and then that linear layout is inside another linear layout which is also being calculated dynamically depending on the weights of the views inside it. But in that case, you will even have a warning in Android Studio. Okay, so I will say if you notice that you are doing something very complex, it's like many different levels, like linear layout, and inside has another linear layout, and inside has another relative layout, and a frame layout, and inside has another linear layout, and this, then you would probably get to know that you are going too deep. Okay. Usually you will try to get the structure as flat as possible. Okay. But having a few levels is not a big issue. Okay. Is there any tool to optimize your layout for the best performance? Well, there was a tool that was the hierarchy viewer, and that was kind of the tool that was telling you in which point it was starting to be bad. Unfortunately, this tool has been deprecated, and there's no anything similar that I know. I mean, there's a replacement, but that replacement doesn't have that information, doesn't include that information. Is there a performance ranking for each view group? Not that I know. Obviously, there are view groups that are more complex, but if you need them, then they are there to be used. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. As I said, as you have some experience, you will realize yourselves when you are doing something that is not good. Okay. So, how to add more than one XML file to the application? For example, one for the login screen and one for the main application once the login is successful. Okay. The thing here is like you don't only need a second or another XML file. You need a different activity. Remember that an activity is kind of a screen, kind of a UI page in some way. Okay. So if you are going to something completely different, like for example from a login to first main screen after login, it's not only that you need a different XML, it's that you need a different activity. So you will have an activity for the login, and that activity will have its XML. And then you will have another activity, which will use a different XML. Let's gonna do this. So let's pretend that we have another button, okay, here. And this button says next, okay. Now let's go to the activity. Let's get a reference to the button. Say I'm going to extract this as a field. Okay, and that's going to add it a listener. Okay, and it's going to say toast. Okay, so let's go step by step. So in theory, what we've done is that we have added a button and we have set a click listener. So when we click on the button, we will have a toast message. Oh, no, because did I run? Ah, yeah, I added to the wrong button. Fair enough. So then we have out those messages. So now let's gonna create a method here. I'm gonna extract this to a method. Okay, so let's call okay, and what we're gonna do now is we're gonna launch the second activity. We need to create the activity, so let's gonna do this. Come to here, say right click, new activity, say empty activity, and let's gonna call it, for example, second activity. Okay. Okay. As you can see, we have the new activity and we have the new layout here. Okay. This layout is essentially empty. We can add a text view, for example. Just gonna add some dummy text. Okay. So now that we have this, what's gonna do? This is probably a bit more advanced than what you've seen, and multi-screen apps are covered later in the course in the nano degree. But still, I think it's good to have a look at it. So I create an intent which represents the intention to perform an action, and this intent represents the intention to from main activity launch our second activity. And then we say start activity with this intent. Okay. It's gonna remove this line because we don't need the toast anymore. Building. So in theory, if we click next, we will go to the second activity, right? So that's the way that you need to do in order to have different screens. Okay. Now let's go for, well, okay, we're done with the questions. So I hope that you enjoyed the session. I hope that all these explanations were helpful to you. You know that we are in Slack always, anytime, ready to help you. Drop your questions there and we will be happy to give you a hand. And also you can rely on the community and rest of the students for that. So that said, Christmas is coming, and I would like to say that I hope that you all have a nice Christmas break. I'm sure you have been super good, so you will have lots of presents probably. And keep in touch. We are here to help. Merry Christmas.